Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new Two Cyber Chicks podcast. You're about to join Erika and Jax for an inclusive cybersecurity conversation designed to educate and break the stereotypes of cybersecurity professionals while providing life hacks on how to handle burnout, networking, and goal setting. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
Dr. Wendy, thanks for coming on the show. Jax, I've been telling you about Dr. Wendy Ng for a while now. She's a principal cloud security architect and a well-established thought leader in the cybersecurity space. Her background is in infrastructure, cloud security, and her experiences have ranged from aerospace, healthcare, financial services, telecommunications, transport logistics, and national infrastructure. Dr. Wendy, we are so excited you were able to join us today. To kick things off, would you please share your background with our listeners?
Sure. Thank you, Erika, for the introduction. It's great to be on the show. So my background is quite eclectic. I actually started off my life as an academic, so in genetics, in fact. So I did undergraduate in genetics, and then I moved on to Ph.D. in medical genetics, looking at complex diseases, which leaned a lot of data analytics and sort of statistical methodologies in, to try and get insights from data. I suppose it probably known as big data in more recent times. At that time, it was just statistical analysis. So after that, unfortunately, my sort of biology didn't actually agree with the experiments. So I developed bad eczema as part of the process. You didn't really do that much experiment before the doctorate. So I had to do a pivot, moved into infrastructure, started my commercial career with Cisco. I'm very much a geek at heart. So I went into technical consulting. And during that process, I sort of realized, once I got into that field, I realized, wait a minute, everything's connected. And protocols were not designed to be secure. They were designed to sort of allow people to communicate. Cybersecurity is going to be a fantastically interesting field. Plus, I sort of saw I think a lot of the analytics side of it was very similar to sort of my background, some of the statistical methods I used. So it's moved into very eclectic background.
Yeah, Dr. Wendy, wow. I was over here typing out the notes while you were talking. I was like, oh my gosh. She was like, you were in genetics, medical genetics, which I have a very limited understanding of that space just through my graduate program and understanding the technology around the medical genetics and big data. And then you went from genetics to Cisco, and then you went into technical consulting. And today you're a principal cloud security architect. What does your day-to-day look like? You seem like you have a very analytical mind. So you like that part of it. But what does your day-to-day look like as a principal cloud security architect?
So my role is effectively a cloud security advisor for the organization. So, whether it's private cloud, which is, networking, or, the public cloud, which is multi-tenanted networks for, the AWS, Azure, Google, it's what's sort of classified as cloud technologies. So my role is, for the operations, for the technical designs, my role is to look at those and advise the organization on, possible risks that we may have, identify them, and how we can remediate those. Now, it's very much, I like to think that I try to be sort of we're not there to say, no, you can't do this, right? Which is, I think, some of the kind of past cultures in cybersecurity sort of materializes it. We try to go to the business and speak to them and engage with them, as early as possible in the product development, so that, we're not going to come to some nasty surprise at the end or something that's unexpected. So we want to work with the team as soon as we can, from the inception of product design to the, throughout the whole operational system until the product's retired. So it is predominantly an advisory role.
Yes, you're with the product. It sounds like you're with the product life cycle from the start to the end of it, correct?
Yes. I mean, we're not, unless you're a actual cybersecurity company, obviously you're not necessarily revenue generating. So we do try to be as present as much as possible, but you probably can see from, there's going to be a limited, cybersecurity. There's always a sort of shortage of professionals, and it's difficult to find them in the market. So you do drag into different places, into different programs. But it's good. It makes the day very interesting. So, one day I can be looking at satellites, the other day I can be looking at, OSS systems. So it's definitely a variety.
So in your day-to-day, do you work autonomously? So it's mostly you doing your day-to-day operations, or do you have a team to support you as you do it?
So I do work in a team, and I do have people who support me in the looking at reviewing products, designs. There's actually another team who is more predominantly involved in operations as well. And we work quite closely with them, as well as the legal and compliance team, because obviously we work in different jurisdictions, and we need to be we need to know of what laws and regulations we might be subjected to. So it's a very communal and collaborative environment, and it has to be, because we don't want to be a situation whereby somebody would just go in and say, look, you can't deploy this solution, because we feel there's a risk. Well, okay, there's a risk. Well, what can we do to mitigate the risk? Because this is something the business needs. So, we're there to support the organization. We're not there to say, you can't do what you need to do to maintain the operations and to sort of grow the organization.
Dr. Wendy, you have a vast experience in consulting. You've worked for some of the industry's largest high-profile firms, organizations. What have been some of the key takeaways in your career thus far that you've been able to take some learnings or experiences that have shaped who you are today and the role that you do today?
So I think the consulting experience is fantastic, because it's great if you're sort of quite nerdy or geeky, because, you literally oftentimes just get thrown into a project. It's like you get told, like, here's your new client, this is their issue, go and run with it. So it's actually quite a good preparation for sort of preparing you to handle the unexpected, which, the pandemic showed hit us any time. The other thing, I think, because I've sort of worked in those fairly top tier consultancies, I think I had probably been fortunate enough to have been exposed to some of the programs and projects that might not have happened if I wasn't there. I was there to help Maersk when they had the ransomware, to rebuild their private cloud private system. And I think that is a privilege to sort of be immersed in that and look at and sort of get exposure and actually make a difference to an organization. And it's not just helping them to sort of increase their revenue or decrease their expenditure. It is a matter of whether this organization survives going forward. So I think the ability to sort of see how your contribution can make a difference to organizations. I think one of the things that I have been writing blogs since 2016. And one of the reasons why sort of motivated me to doing that is I see so many clients where they were effectively facing very similar issues. They were getting, consultancy expertise in, and they effectively were dealing with very similar issues. And I just felt that, since I get exposure to the industry, and since I know some of the issues, let's just try and share it with the community. So those blogs sort of led to sort of presentations and other opportunities to share with the community. I think that's probably the most satisfying aspect of my background and role.
I love this. The depth and brevity of what you are providing and the knowledge base that you have in this space is so remarkable. I mean, you have a PhD in medical genetics, and you also, on top of that, hold numerous certifications. Just the PhD alone is a feat in itself. So explain to us, Dr. Wendy, where do you get the motivation and the drive to not only get your PhD, but to get these certifications?
So the PhD, I have to say, so I had all my education in the UK, and we have a pretty kind of rapid, let's put it accelerated, our degrees are 3 years and pretty rapid education system. The PhD was partly parental influence, I have to say. I'm not proud to say this, but I have to say, my dad is a medic, and he was like, well, 3-year degree is not going to cut it for me, right? You need to be more educated. And I was like, well, why not? And I think I was very fortunate to have got full funding for it. And, to be honest, I think, I was probably a little bit immature for my age at that point. So might as well carry on and just, allow my sort of temperament and personality to develop a bit more before I jump into the role. And having said that, though, I did choose my degree because I'm interested in it. It was when I was in high school, it was the sort of in biology, it was the module that I found the easiest and most intuitive. And I generally, I'm still keeping up with the, in the medical genetics and sort of biological field. But yeah, I know it's just the opportunity arose, well, partly parental expectation, the opportunity arose. Why not?
I think that's super cool. I love that you have a PhD in medical. That's so cool. So I wanted to ask, you're obviously known in the industry as a thought leader. I see education is super valuable and important to you, not only for your own personal self, but like also to giving back to the community. And we see that through your published articles, through your speaking engagements. I'm just curious, as our listeners are thinking about exploring maybe getting published or speaking opportunities, do you have any advice? Think about, when you were getting started and just starting to speak for the first time, or maybe the first few articles you were able to contribute in. Is there any advice that you could share on how to get started?
So how to get started or continuing? Because it sort of started literally just go for it. I think, if you feel, I moved into cybersecurity partly because I see a lot of similarity with my sort of background in medical genetics, especially the sort of area of medical genetics, which use a lot of analytics. So I was, already primed, as it were. So I was certainly interested in sort of, this is a topic, it's, I'm not in it just so that I have a roof over my head, I'm in it because I feel quite passionate about it. So I think because of that, I think it's easier for me to just sort of say, start sharing those experiences. But for somebody who's starting out, for, someone in, early career, early audience, I think there's, if you look at what you do and look at your experiences, find something that you feel passionate about and share that experience with the community and just do it. Like you're going to have, maybe doubts the first few blogs or, the first few panels, you'd be like, oh, did I say the right thing? But, just like literally do it. There's nothing beats just kind of going out and doing it. Once you started doing that, I think you start to you get more confident in it. But there's also something to be said about continuing it. So not just, do it and sort of say, oh, I'm comfortable and then stop. I think, it is a sort of, for me, it's kind of quite therapeutic in a way to sort of, it's got to a point where I think of it almost as, it won't be brushing your teeth, but, it's almost a bit like that, okay, it's another month. I need to,
yeah, it's part of your routine.
Part of my, yeah, exactly. It's part of the routine. So, but if you're just starting out, find something that you feel strongly about and just write it, and it'll come out. Because if if you're just trying to write something or present something that you don't really feel passionate about, it shows, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's super fair. I think that's great advice. It will show if you're not super passionate about it, and the easiest way to get comfortable is through repetition. And like you said, if it's something that you're genuinely interested and passionate about, it'll just flow. So I think that's great advice. And let's think back to your first few, published blogs, articles, or maybe even speaking engagements. Do you have any advice for people that are actively seeking them? So think about, somebody starting out in the field that wants to be a thought leader, but they haven't had the opportunity. So they're maybe having to go and seek them out. Did you ever have to do that? Do you have any advice?
So I started, the sort of thing with sort of social media is there's so many outlets, right? So when I started writing, and I still do, it's partly because it's, I don't have to, I've written for companies before, there's certain sort of the legal might have to go through your content and sort of say, you can and can't. So part of it is so that I want to sort of produce materials that's unfiltered, as it were, or as, unfiltered as possible. But I actually started off, there's a article production. You can upload articles on LinkedIn. And I just, started off that. And then sort of some of the organizations I work with realized, oh, hang on, she can write, and, she doesn't come across as a complete idiot. So they sort of asked me to, get involved in sort of the, being representing the organization. I did actually write a blog for Cloud Security Alliance, but it all kind of came from like, you need to put something out there, I think, and you don't need to be, it doesn't have to be a sort of established channel. I am a big believer in, I think, to basically just put yourself out there. And, I think if it's good, if the audience is receptive, more will come. And if not, well, you tried it, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to sort of promise the audience that, whatever you write is going to be,
Right.
brilliant, and everyone's going to love you for it. And I do have to say, if you put yourself out there, there is a certain risk. Not everybody sort of necessarily agrees with your comment.
100%. Yeah. And everything you're saying is completely resonating, because Erika knows my own personal journey of putting myself out there and be forward facing within the social media community with YouTube. And I remember the first time I ever started a blog, I was so afraid that it was going to be terrible. People were just going to chastise me. And I think that because the space we're in, because there are a lot of smart people, and I'm using air quotes, it can even be more frightening to put stuff out there because you may not be 100% right. But I love what you're saying. Put the content out there and just realize it's better to try, because you're going to learn more about yourself. So try, you might fail, but you're going to learn so much from it. And I mean, the cybersecurity space, Dr. Wendy, it's still in a lot of ways in its beginning journey because of emerging technology. We've got unknown technology. And in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to be in a completely different place than where we're at even today with like quantum computing and even just the shift to cloud infrastructure, for example. So what are some tips you have for professionals that are listening to this, and maybe they're in their first year of cybersecurity right now and into their journey? Would you encourage them to maybe hyper focus in one particular field and become that SME? Or would you encourage them to maybe expand their aperture a little bit more to learn more about this field, to then at that time refine where they want to study, and then at that point, after a couple of years, then maybe hyper focus into a subject?
So it depends on what sort of their background is and what their kind of temperament. There are some, I met some very, early professional, early career cyber professionals, and they know exactly what they want to do and they're good at it, and they're motivated, and I'm like, well, good for you, go for it, carry on that route. But if they're sort of just entering the sort of field, and they're, I suppose, if you were still not too sure about which area you're kind of want to sort of dab your toes into, I think to try and get as broad of just get a breadth of projects and just see which ones you enjoy. And I think there's something to be said about sort of being in consulting for that sort of type of exposure, or any kind of client-facing role, because you sort of see different organizations and what their situations are. I think eventually, as depends on the sort of the individual's career aspirations, but at some point, whether you sort of dive deep and then sort of, due to the, your role being, as you get more senior, your role expands naturally anyway, and you start to get exposure to other, different disciplines within cybersecurity, or you sort of start from breadth and then maintain a relatively breadth sort of stance. I think the end goal is probably going to be quite similar. As you get more senior, you need to sort of have some understanding of the different aspects. But I think just keep an open mind, I think is probably the best advice I can give.
Dr. Wendy, thank you so much for sharing all of this knowledge. I think keeping an open mind is such a great tidbit to leave this episode on, especially as people transition through life and their career, and knowing that you don't know what you may like or be passionate about until you give it a try. So Dr. Wendy, for listeners here on the show that may want to learn more about you, read some of your articles, blog postings, or maybe even tune into one of your speaking engagements, where's the best place to find you?
Probably LinkedIn, partly because it's overhead wise. It's slightly, I do post things on my LinkedIn profile.
Awesome. So we will post your LinkedIn information in the show notes for our listeners. And Dr. Wendy, thank you so much again for coming on the show. This was such a blast.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Two Cyber Chicks podcast with Erika and Jax. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.